I have the pleasure to introduce Justin Endres. Justin's CRO over at Seclore and been in the industry for a couple decades. Been in the channel quite a bit, so knows these relationships well, but also been a part of a number of large entities in executive roles where you've successfully helped those companies get to the next level. So thanks for being here, Justin.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it. Fairly tough to follow that one up. That's an impressive program. Didn't know anything about it, so I'm glad I had the opportunity to learn more. But I typically find myself humbled for a lot of reasons when we think about security, but that was not one of them until today. So fantastic program, and certainly goes to show, I think, what Novacos is doing out there, not only in the community, certainly as a partner, but also in training and creating, I think, closing, I guess, what would be a massive skill gap. So today, I want to talk a little bit about what you're going to hear in probably droves today, and that is, the significance of Gen AI, right? Artificial intelligence, LLMs. You're going to hear all sorts of stories about how impressive this technology is, and so I don't disagree with that. I think it's absolutely a fact that this is certainly the way that we're trending. What I hope today is maybe to extend, or at least open up the aperture a little bit and think about how ChatGPT or any of the Gen AI type solutions, LLMs, whatever you want to refer to them as. One of the things that we're seeing at Seclore, and certainly try to make sure that you're seeing this from a few different perspectives. There's a lot of great technology, and I'm sure plenty of vendors will talk about how they're leveraging artificial intelligence in their products. I want to talk more about how we're leveraging it in the organizations themselves, and certainly I think the impact that we're seeing not only with the CISOs that we work with, but in just general conversations. You can hear, feel, sense the anxiety that continues to, I think, evolve. So with that, by quick show of hands, who is familiar with Seclore, heard of us, worked with us? All right, fantastic. So I know we have some customers here. We've got folks that we've spoken with throughout the years. We are also privileged to be here, I don't know, 4th, 5th time, something along those lines. It's a great show. But if you're not familiar with us, Seclore, we are on a mission to protect the world's most sensitive data. And we'll talk about how we do that here momentarily. But more specifically, we work with thousands of very large enterprise customers and that most sensitive digital asset. So we'll talk a little bit about really how exposed we are today, unfortunately, but where we're evolving as we think about artificial intelligence. We know what the business is thinking, right? You hear it all the time. We read it in the papers. We're going to hear all the different efficiencies and productivity stories, right? We're going to hear about all the great things that we're going to get from artificial intelligence. And this is what the lines of business, whatever, may be thinking about. And I know that it's a little bit different perspective for you, the CISO, or anybody in the IT, but primarily in the security side of this. And so my conversations have been met with a lot of anxiety about, well, how do we contend with this? What do we do? Right? And so it looks a little bit different, right? And so this is what I call kind of this provocative truth. And that is one big question I think really has to be answered. And that simply is, can we keep pace? Can we protect, right, our organizations, the data that we're trying to protect? How do we do that? Because we haven't been great at it so far, unfortunately, right? When we think about, I think by 2025, managing somewhere close to 175 zettabytes of data, as we think about, the absolute growth of that and how that only accelerates as we think about a lot of the, different artificial intelligent mechanisms that will start flooding the ecosystem with data. How do we protect this data? And not only how do we protect it internally, but how do we protect our data externally, right? We often hear about how it's been exfiltrated, right? The reality is that a lot of data, the way that we collaborate today, doesn't live inside the traditional norm of what we consider the enterprise, right? Data is moving all over the place, sometimes completely out of our control. And this is what we hope to talk about certainly today. So here are the terms I hear about, right? Here are the terms that you talk about, and certainly the organizations that we work with, right? All sorts of various sorts of concerns. The one I have grown, I guess, a deep appreciation for is this AI hallucination. So I can't tell you that I understand all of these things, but what I will tell you is they're all very real threats to the organization itself. So a couple of questions. Who in here plans on rolling out or maybe preventing LLMs or artificial intelligence inside your organizations? Either stopping it today, not allowing it, or preventing it over the next 12 months. Anybody here? Maybe a little higher just so we can get a quick appreciation. So maybe 5%, 10% of the room not going to allow it. Here's the bigger question. How many of us will discontinue working with third parties that are also leveraging these technologies, albeit that it's not in our control? Anybody? So this becomes the bigger problem, right? And I'll offer some scenarios today that we've seen within the organizations we work. But again, when I think about expanding the aperture, this is not just about what we think about normally, and that is inside of the four walls of the organization, or however you tend to think about how control and security is working. But it's also extending it beyond the enterprise, right? Extending it beyond the four walls of your organization. How are people going to be handling your data? And as importantly, how are you going to handle their data, right? It introduces all sorts of different issues, whether it be privacy, security, compliance, all of these things that you have to contend with. So what I will tell you is we have an opportunity. We can learn from what we've done in the past, right? We're all familiar with when shadow IT hit us, right? We probably weren't as prepared as we wanted to be. Anybody feel like they really had that one nailed? No? Okay. Well, we have an opportunity to learn from what we did then and sometimes what we did not do, certainly in preparation. But there is no such thing as slowing this kind of beast down, so we have to move quickly, right? If we want to certainly contend with this notion of artificial intelligence, we can't be reactive. This has to be a proactive position that we take. We have to move with intentionality. And we're going to show you some of the different occurrences that we're seeing, and you've probably read about when it comes to artificial intelligence and what it's doing. But let's play with a couple of different use cases. Let's assume that you're an organization, your legal team needs a little bit of a help, and they upload one of their sensitive documents inside of one of these ChatGPTs, LLMs, whatever it may be, right? They upload the document. It has a lot of sensitive data, and they think, hey, this really worked, right? It helped us in some certain way. The challenge is, as you know, this data now lives on, and it can be used and presented to other organizations, unfortunately, right? This is what's happening. This is a use case that we saw with one of our customers. Another use case, large semiconductor we're working with. The reality is that they had some IP, uploaded it, submitted it to a bunch of vendors who are working on fabrication for them. Reality is that it wasn't even them. It was the third parties started uploading this in their response to an RFP, and that IP now was exposed. We've all read about, the Samsungs of the world and some of the real tragic events that are happening, and I assure you that it's happening. It's way more pervasive than what you're seeing. We see it constantly based on the customers that we work with. But again, it's just a mindset of really opening that aperture and thinking about not only the data and how you're going to control it internally, but I would ask that you start thinking about how do we control things externally. So 2 things I think we can learn very quickly. And again, this is typically about an hour and a half session that we do with organizations, but I will run through it very quickly. 1, acknowledge reality. 2, also understand that we have to discard this idea of a stupid user. People do not, anybody in the security awareness side of the house? Right? So the reality is, we've got 1 or 2, but the reality is this is not about people not knowing, right? This is about people trying to do their job and become more efficient, more productive. They actually know. But when we did a survey, 68% of folks will absolutely go around whatever security policies, process, whatever it may be in order to get the job done. And we inherently know this, But I would ask that if we're going to be intentional about how we protect our data, certainly as it pertains to artificial intelligence, these are the things that we have to contend with. So the question we ask our customers, the question we ask ourselves, that's rather small up here, but that's all right. How do we protect data persistently, right? No matter where it lives at any point in time, how do we assure that we can protect data, meaning control data wherever it flows, meaning that when you have access to my data, I still retain control, meaning that when you might have possession of my data, I still retain control. I think that's where we want to live moving forward. And so, this is a very simple way of thinking about it, right? But when we think about data in a hyper-connected world where collaboration exists all the time, and we understand and we truly internalize the fact that it's always on the move, way beyond the edge of our networks, right? You got to think a little bit broader here. And it's happening at higher velocity. The criticality of the data is certainly going up. All of these different elements are certainly at play. And we have a lot of technologies, but again, historically, we've thought about how do we prevent it from leaving my organization? That's not the way that we can think about it moving forward. Data is leaving your organization, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentionally, and sometimes, obviously, with adversaries that are trying to get to that specific data. So all the different elements that we leverage, this happens inside of every one of our organizations. And again, once we start to understand that, we can start to appreciate that possession of data doesn't have to equal control, right? When people take your data, there is a way for you to continue to protect it or prevent people from using it in the wrong way. So I'll walk you through what we do at Seclore. One, we encrypt it. Everybody encrypts data, right? Nothing special there. A little bit different though. Now we start thinking about how do we provide dynamic, right, access controls to that. Meaning I can change my mind as far as what you can do with my data at any point in time, both internally and externally. And this can be done dynamically. It can also provide for what level of access you have, but what you can also do with that data, right? Do you have the ability to print it, view it, copy it, forward it, whatever the case may be. And then last but not least, starting to leverage watermarking, I think, in our standard approach. This is not something that most organizations are doing today. I assure you that within the customer base that we have, this has stopped 3 or 4 different very big incidents from happening. One with a very large beverage organization that probably some of us drank all the time. And the reality is that by virtually putting this digital watermarking in place, we were able to save the fact that they were trying to share it with another beverage manufacturer. But this is all to say that this is about how do we provide you with an understanding about how your data is being used, something that's highly consumable and highly actionable at any point in time. We'll talk more about this, but I won't have enough time, so I'm going to move quickly through. There's a lot of use cases that every one of you have today, right? We're talking about Gen AI, LLMs, we're talking about this, but it's a little bit bigger than that when we just think about how data is being consumed and how you're collaborating with third parties, with your suppliers, with consultants. Your ability to really take control of this, I think, is absolutely required if we want to stay on pace to adopt these new technologies, right? Last but not least, and then I'm going to run out of time, but that being said, we would love to talk to you more about some of these different items. Again, this is typically a much bigger talk when we think about Gen AI, LLMs, and how we protect data moving forward. But there is a path forward, and I would tell you that the answers typically lie in the history of what we've done well and some of the places that we have actually fallen down, right, as organizations. And we hope to help. You're going to hear a lot about different technologies here today that will also help you. But at the end of the day, I think I would strongly urge you, not scare you, but strongly urge you to think about how are we going to do this a little bit differently than what we've done in the past and understand that there is a path forward. So again, I appreciate your time, humbled not only by the video earlier, but certainly the opportunity to work with all of you. I hope you have a great convention here. It's always been a great show, but thank you for your time and certainly thank you for your interest.